They laughed when the veteran inherited a worthless, burned-down hotel in the mountains. But no one was laughing when his German shepherd uncovered the secret hidden beneath it. Michael Hayes had lost almost everything after the war. The noise of the world still echoed in his mind, and the only companion who never left his side was Titan, the loyal German shepherd who had served with him overseas. When a distant relative left Michael an abandoned hotel high in the Rocky Mountains, it seemed like nothing more than a cruel joke. The building was falling apart, the town around it was nearly empty, and powerful people were already trying to buy the land for pennies. But on the very first night inside the crumbling hotel, Titan began digging. And what the dog discovered beneath the mountain would reveal a secret worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching this story from. We love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. The rain had been falling since before dawn, a cold Wyoming rain that never seemed to stop. It soaked the empty parking lot of the roadside gas station and drummed softly on the rusted roof of an old pickup truck parked beneath a flickering yellow light. Inside the truck, Michael Hayes woke up with a sudden jolt. For a moment, his heart raced wildly in his chest. His breathing came fast and shallow, the way it always did when the dream came back. The sound of the rain tapping against the windshield had turned into something else in his mind. Distant gunfire echoing through a valley half a world away. Michael grabbed the steering wheel, his knuckles tightening until the memory faded. "Easy, easy," he muttered under his breath. Beside him, a large German shepherd lifted his head from the passenger seat. The dog watched him quietly, ears forward, eyes calm and steady. "I'm good, Titan," Michael said after a moment. Titan didn't move right away. The dog had learned long ago that sometimes Michael said he was fine when he wasn't. Michael rubbed his face with both hands and let out a slow breath. Outside, the rain blurred the world into streaks of gray. The small-town gas station was barely awake. A lone truck rumbled past on the highway, its tires hissing on wet pavement. This had been their life for almost a year. Michael Hayes had once been an Army Ranger. 15 years in the service, 2 tours overseas, a chest full of medals he kept sealed in a box somewhere he never opened anymore. When he came home, the war had followed him. The doctors called it PTSD. For Michael, it was something simpler. The war had never really ended. Jobs came and went. Construction, security work, auto repair. Each one lasted until the sleepless nights caught up with him. Eventually, the jobs stopped coming. The apartment was gone next. Now there was just the truck, the road, and Titan. Michael reached over and scratched behind the dog's ear. Titan leaned into his hand with quiet loyalty. "You and me, partner," Michael said softly. Titan had served beside him during his final deployment. The dog had been trained to detect explosives and track movement through rough terrain. But more than that, Titan had saved Michael's life more than once. When the Army retired the dog after an injury, Michael refused to leave him behind. So they both came home together. Now they both slept in a pickup truck. Michael pushed open the driver's door and stepped out into the rain. The cold air bit through his worn jacket as he stretched his stiff back. The gas station clerk was just unlocking the door. Michael walked inside, the bell above the entrance giving a tired jingle. The place smelled like burnt coffee and old motor oil. He bought the cheapest coffee they had and a small packet of beef jerky for Titan. The clerk glanced at him, but didn't ask questions. Men who lived out of trucks weren't unusual along this highway. Michael stepped back outside and sat on the tailgate. Titan jumped down beside him, tail wagging slowly. They shared the jerky while the rain fell around them. For a few quiet minutes, life felt almost peaceful. Then the mail truck pulled in. The driver stepped out carrying a stack of envelopes and began sorting them into the small row of metal boxes mounted along the wall of the gas station. Michael rarely received mail. Almost no one knew where he was anymore. But when the driver walked toward him, holding a thick envelope, Michael felt a small knot form in his stomach. "Michael Hayes?" the driver asked. Michael nodded slowly. The envelope was heavy cream paper, the kind used by law offices. His name was printed neatly across the front. Michael turned it over in his hands. The return address read, Henderson and Cole, Attorneys at Law, Denver, Colorado. He frowned. "I think you got a sign for it," the driver said. Michael scribbled his name on the clipboard and took the envelope. For a moment, he just stared at it while rain dripped from the brim of his cap. Titan nudged his hand. Yeah, Michael said quietly. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter and several official documents. Michael began reading. The words took a moment to make sense. Dear Mr. Hayes, we regret to inform you of the passing of your uncle, Harold Whitaker. As his nearest surviving relative, you have been named the sole beneficiary of his remaining estate. Michael blinked. Uncle Harold. He hadn't heard that name in 20 years. The man had been a quiet, strange relative who disappeared into the mountains when Michael was still a teenager. Michael kept reading. The remainder of the estate includes the property known as the Ironwood Hotel, located outside Silver Ridge, Colorado. Ownership has now legally transferred to you. Michael stopped. The Ironwood Hotel? He murmured. Titan tilted his head. Michael flipped through the documents. Old photographs were attached. A massive wooden hotel perched on a cliff overlooking a valley surrounded by pine forests. Even in the faded photos, the building looked ancient. Another page listed the details. The property had been abandoned for nearly 20 years. Back taxes were owed. Structural damage was noted. And at the bottom of the document was a line that made Michael's stomach tighten. The owner must bring the property up to county safety code within 90 days, or the structure will be condemned and demolished. Michael let out a long breath. Well, he muttered. Titan sat beside him, watching his face carefully. Michael looked down at the photo again. A giant hotel in the mountains. Rotting. Falling apart. Probably worth less than the truck he was sitting on. But it was still something. A roof. Walls. Maybe even a place to start over. Michael folded the letter slowly. He stared out at the gray highway stretching toward the distant mountains. For the first time in months, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe the road had finally led somewhere. He scratched Titan behind the ear again. What do you think, partner? He said quietly. Titan's tail thumped once against the wet metal tailgate. Michael looked back at the photograph of the Ironwood Hotel. He had no idea yet that beneath that rotting building lay something powerful enough to change everything. And he certainly didn't know that somewhere in those mountains, a man named Richard Caldwell was already waiting for him to arrive. Michael finished his coffee and stood up. All right, he said. Let's go see what kind of trouble your new hotel gets us into. Titan jumped into the passenger seat as Michael climbed back behind the wheel. The old pickup engine rumbled to life. Rain continued to fall as they pulled out onto the highway, heading toward the Rocky Mountains. Neither of them knew it yet, but that drive was about to lead them straight into the fight of their lives. The highway stretched west through miles of empty land as Michael Hayes drove toward the Rocky Mountains. The rain had faded by midday, leaving the sky a dull gray that hung low over the plains. Titan sat in the passenger seat, alert as always, his ears twitching at every passing sound. The truck's engine hummed steadily, though it occasionally rattled when Michael pushed it too hard. The old pickup had seen better days, but it still had enough life left to climb the long road into Colorado. Michael drove for hours. The scenery slowly began to change. Flat land gave way to rolling hills, and those hills eventually rose into dark green mountains. Tall pine forests lined the roads now, and the air seemed colder the higher they climbed. By late afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds just long enough to cast golden light across the peaks. Michael rolled down the window and let the mountain air fill the truck. It smelled like pine, wet earth, and snow. Titan leaned slightly toward the breeze, nose working as he took in the unfamiliar scents. "You like that, huh?" Michael said. Titan thumped his tail once. Michael hadn't been in the mountains in years. Something about the quiet reminded him of training exercises during his army days. Long hikes through rough terrain with nothing but the sound of wind in the trees. For the first time in a long while, his mind felt calm. Then the road sign appeared. "Welcome to Silver Ridge, Colorado. Population 1,842. The town looked like something frozen in time. Old brick buildings lined the main street. Many storefronts were boarded up, their faded signs hinting at businesses that had closed long ago. A rusted water tower stood over the town like a silent watchman. Michael slowed the truck as he rolled through the quiet streets. People noticed him immediately. Small towns had a way of spotting strangers. An older man pumping gas stopped and watched the truck pass. A waitress leaning in the doorway of a diner narrowed her eyes slightly. Titan noticed it too. The dog sat up straighter, scanning the sidewalks with the same quiet vigilance he once used in war zones. Michael finally spotted a small county office building with a wooden sign that read, "Silver Ridge County Services." He parked the truck outside. Inside, the office smelled faintly of dust and old paper. A single ceiling fan spun lazily overhead. Behind the counter sat a woman in her late 50s, wearing reading glasses and a thick gray sweater. She looked up as Michael entered. "You lost?" she asked. "Maybe," Michael replied with a small smile. "I'm looking for the Ironwood Hotel." The woman's expression changed immediately. She leaned back slowly in her chair. "You the new owner?" she asked. Michael nodded. "Michael Hayes." She studied him carefully. Then she glanced down at Titan standing beside him. "Well," she said quietly, "guess that explains it." "Explains what?" "The hotel finally found someone unlucky enough to inherit it." Michael frowned slightly. "That bad?" The woman stood up and walked to a large window behind the counter. She pointed toward the mountains rising beyond town. "You see that ridge up there?" she said. Michael followed her finger. Far above the valley, barely visible through the trees, stood a massive shape perched on the edge of a cliff. Even from miles away, Michael could tell it was enormous. "That's the Ironwood," the woman said. Michael stared at it. The building looked like a dark shadow against the sky. "How long's it been empty?" he asked. "Close to 20 years. "What happened?" The woman hesitated. "Your Uncle Harold shut it down. No one really knows why. After that, the place just rotted." She turned back toward him. "County's been trying to tear it down for years." Michael pulled the legal documents from his jacket. "I saw something about 90 days. The woman nodded. "Structural code violations, back taxes, safety issues." She adjusted her glasses. If you don't fix it within 90 days, the county condemns it and brings in bulldozers. Michael let out a slow breath. That expensive? Very. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she added quietly, You might want to think about selling. Michael looked up. Selling? She nodded again. Guy named Richard Caldwell's been trying to buy that property for years. Michael's stomach tightened slightly. Why? Claims he wants to build a resort. She shrugged. Personally, I think he just wants the land. Michael folded the papers again. Where's the road up there? The woman gave him a look that was half curiosity and half sympathy. North end of town. One road. Steep climb. She paused before adding, Watch the turns. That road wasn't built for trucks like yours. Michael tipped his cap politely. Appreciate the warning. As he turned to leave, the woman spoke again. Mr. Hayes. Michael stopped. You might hear people call that place cursed. Michael raised an eyebrow. You believe that? She gave a small smile. No. Then her voice dropped slightly. But a lot of people in this town do. Outside, the sky had darkened again. Michael climbed back into the truck and started the engine. Titan sat upright as they rolled through town and followed the narrow road toward the mountains. The pavement soon gave way to gravel. The truck climbed steadily through thick pine forest. The road twisted sharply along the mountain, sometimes with nothing but a steep drop beyond the edge. Michael gripped the steering wheel tighter as the truck struggled uphill. Finally, the trees opened. And there it was, the Ironwood Hotel. Michael slowed the truck to a stop. The building rose 4 stories high on the edge of the cliff, a massive wooden structure with long balconies and pointed rooftops that looked straight out of another century. But time had not been kind to it. Paint peeled from the walls like old bark. Several windows were boarded up. One corner of the roof sagged slightly. The entire place looked like it had been forgotten by the world. Michael stepped out of the truck slowly. The wind on the cliff carried the scent of pine and distant snow. Titan jumped down beside him. For a long moment, they both stood there staring. Home sweet home, Michael muttered. Titan suddenly stiffened. The dog's ears snapped forward. Then a low growl rumbled in his throat. Michael turned. Behind them, climbing the mountain road, a black SUV appeared through the trees. The vehicle rolled slowly up the gravel drive and stopped a few yards away. The door opened. A tall man stepped out wearing a tailored coat and polished shoes that looked very out of place on a muddy mountain road. His smile was smooth and confident. Michael Hayes, the man said. His voice carried easily in the cold mountain air. I've been waiting for you. Michael said nothing. The man walked forward slowly. My name is Richard Caldwell, he continued. I believe we have some business to discuss. Titan stepped forward with a deep, warning growl. Caldwell glanced down at the dog. His smile tightened slightly. Well now, he said softly. Looks like your friend doesn't like me very much. Michael's eyes narrowed. Dogs are good judges of character. Caldwell chuckled. I suppose they are. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded check. I'll get straight to the point, he said. I'd like to buy this hotel from you. Michael didn't even glance at the check. Why? Caldwell gestured toward the massive, rotting building. Because it's a disaster, and I'm willing to solve your problem. Titan's growl deepened. Caldwell's smile faded just a little. I'll give you $25,000, he said calmly. Cash. Today. The wind swept across the cliff in a cold rush. Michael looked from Caldwell to the hotel behind him. $25,000 would change his life right now. It could buy a small place, get him off the road, give Titan a yard. For a brief second, the offer hung in the air like temptation itself. But Titan suddenly barked sharply. The sound echoed across the mountains. Caldwell stepped back slightly. Michael noticed it. Then he looked back at the man. "Sorry," Michael said quietly. "I think we're going to stay a while." For the first time since arriving, Richard Caldwell's smile vanished completely. The mountain wind howled softly through the broken windows of the Ironwood Hotel. And somewhere inside the old building, a loose door slammed shut with a loud, hollow echo. The sound rolled through the empty balconies and broken windows of the Ironwood Hotel like a distant drum. Michael Hayes didn't move right away. He kept his eyes on Richard Caldwell. The man stood calmly beside his black SUV, the wind tugging at the hem of his expensive coat. He looked completely out of place on the muddy mountain drive, like someone who had stepped out of a city boardroom and wandered onto the wrong movie set. Titan's low growl vibrated through the quiet air. Michael reached down and rested a hand on the dog's back. "Easy," he murmured. Titan didn't stop growling, but he held his ground. Caldwell watched the dog carefully. "That's quite an animal," he said after a moment. "He's seen worse places than this," Michael replied. Caldwell glanced toward the massive hotel behind them. "Yes," he said. "About that." The wind shifted again, whistling through the empty structure. A loose shutter clattered somewhere on the second floor. Michael finally spoke. "You said you wanted to buy it." Caldwell nodded and lifted the folded check again. $25,000, he said. "You sign the deed, walk away, and this place becomes my problem." Michael crossed his arms. "Why do you want it?" Caldwell smiled faintly. "I told you, development." He turned and gestured toward the valley below. "Imagine it. Ski lodges, cabins, a luxury resort overlooking the mountains." Michael studied him carefully. "You could build that anywhere around here." Caldwell shrugged. "True. But this land is perfect." Titan suddenly barked once, sharp, loud. The sound made Caldwell flinch slightly before he hit it with another smile. Michael noticed. "You afraid of dogs?" he asked. "Not at all," Caldwell said smoothly. "Just cautious." Titan stepped forward another inch, teeth barely visible now. Michael scratched the dog's neck. "He doesn't like you." "That's unfortunate," Caldwell said. Michael glanced down at the check again. $25,000. He could almost feel the weight of it. A warm bed, a small cabin somewhere. No more sleeping in a truck. For a moment, the idea tempted him more than he wanted to admit. Then he looked up at the hotel. The ironwood loomed over them like a ghost from another era. It was huge, 4 stories tall, built from thick timber beams that had darkened with age. Long wooden balconies wrapped around the structure, some sagging slightly where the supports had begun to rot. Broken windows stared down at them like empty eyes. The place looked forgotten, but it didn't feel empty. Michael had spent years learning to trust his instincts. Something about the place felt alive. Or maybe that was just the wind. Caldwell cleared his throat. "Well?" Michael folded the check slowly and handed it back. "I just got here," he said. Caldwell's smile froze. "I think I'll look around first." For a brief moment, something cold flickered behind the man's eyes.
Then the polite smile returned. "Of course," Caldwell said. He slipped the check back into his pocket. "Take your time." Titan barked again. Caldwell glanced at the dog. "I'll leave my offer open for 24 hours, he said. He gestured toward the massive building behind Michael.
"You'll change your mind once you see the inside." Michael said nothing. Caldwell turned and walked back to his SUV. Before getting in, he paused. "One more thing," he added. Michael looked at him. "You might hear stories about this place." "What kind of stories?" Caldwell smiled faintly. "Oh, the usual mountain nonsense. Ghosts. Bad luck. People disappearing." The wind picked up again. Michael felt Titan tense beside him. Caldwell opened the driver's door. "If I were you," he said, "I'd take the money." Then he climbed inside the SUV. The engine roared to life. Gravel crunched under the tires as the vehicle turned around and slowly rolled back down the mountain road. Michael watched until it disappeared into the trees. For several seconds, the only sound was the wind. Then Titan let out a deep breath and stopped growling. Michael turned back toward the Ironwood Hotel. "Well," he muttered, "let's see what we just inherited." He walked toward the massive front doors. The old wood creaked under his boots as he climbed the wide porch steps. The boards sagged slightly but held. Up close, the hotel felt even bigger. The front entrance was framed by two thick wooden columns carved with intricate designs that had long since faded. Michael pulled the heavy iron key from his pocket. The lawyer had mailed it with the documents. It was old. Really old. The kind of key that belonged in a museum. Titan sniffed around the doorway, nose working carefully. Michael slid the key into the lock. For a moment, it didn't move. Then, with a loud metallic groan, the lock turned. The massive doors slowly creaked open. Dust drifted into the air as the darkness inside revealed itself. Michael stepped through the doorway. The lobby stretched out before him in a vast, silent space. A grand staircase curved upward toward the second floor. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals dull beneath a thick coat of dust. Rows of old leather chairs sat scattered around the room like forgotten furniture in an abandoned theater. The air smelled like old wood, cold stone, and something faintly metallic. Titan walked slowly ahead of him. The dog's nails clicked softly on the wooden floor. Every sound echoed. Michael moved deeper into the lobby. His boots left faint tracks in the dust. He glanced toward the old reception desk. A wooden rack of room keys still hung on the wall behind it. Most of the hooks were empty, but one key still remained. Room 22. Michael stepped closer. "Strange," he murmured. Titan suddenly froze. The dog's ears shot forward. A low growl rose again from his throat. Michael turned slowly. "What is it?" Titan stared toward the back of the lobby. A narrow hallway disappeared into darkness there. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then, somewhere deep inside the hotel, a single dull thud echoed through the floor. Michael's muscles tightened instantly. His heartbeat picked up. Old instincts from years in combat returned like they had never left. The building was supposed to be empty, but Titan's posture told him something else. The dog's body was rigid now, alert, focused. Michael whispered softly, "Stay." Then he took a cautious step toward the hallway. The wooden floor creaked beneath his boot. The sound echoed down the dark corridor. and somewhere in the shadows ahead, something moved. Michael Hayes froze where he stood. Years of training snapped back into place like a switch flipping in his mind. His breathing slowed automatically. His shoulders lowered slightly as his body settled into the quiet alertness he had learned long ago in places far more dangerous than an abandoned hotel. Titan's growl deepened. The German shepherd's body was rigid now, muscles tight beneath his thick fur. His eyes were locked on the dark hallway ahead. Michael listened. For a long moment, there was nothing but the whisper of wind slipping through cracked windows and the faint creaking of old wood. Then a loose board shifted somewhere deeper inside the building. A dull knock echoed faintly down the corridor. Michael exhaled slowly. "Probably the wind," he murmured. Titan didn't seem convinced. The dog took 3 slow steps forward, nose lifted as he sniffed the stale air. Michael followed carefully. The hallway stretched deeper into the building, lined with closed doors that once led to guest rooms. Dust coated the floor so thickly that each step left clear footprints behind them. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Michael's boots creaked softly on the wood. The building groaned occasionally, as old buildings tend to do, but Titan kept moving with a focused determination that made Michael uneasy. "All right," Michael whispered. "What do you smell?" Titan stopped halfway down the hall. His nose pressed toward the floor. Then he scratched, once, twice. The sound of claws scraping wood echoed sharply. Michael frowned. "Titan?" The dog scratched again, harder this time. Michael stepped closer and looked down. The floorboards were different here. Most of the hallway floor was dark oak, worn smooth by decades of footsteps. But the section Titan was clawing at looked newer, lighter wood, slightly uneven, like it had been replaced at some point. Titan barked once. Then he began digging again. Michael crouched beside him. All right. He brushed some dust away with his hand. Sure enough, the boards had been nailed down more recently than the others. Michael stood up and glanced around the hallway. "Let's see if we can find something to pry this open." They moved back toward the lobby. Behind the reception desk, Michael found an old maintenance closet filled with rusted tools and broken furniture. Among the junk sat a crowbar. He brought it back to the hallway. Titan was still waiting by the same spot, tail twitching impatiently. "You've got good instincts," Michael said. He slid the crowbar under the edge of one board. With a hard pull, crack! The nail popped loose. Another pull. The board lifted. Dust puffed into the air. Titan leaned forward eagerly as Michael pulled the plank aside. Beneath it was a small metal ring embedded in another layer of wood. Michael stared at it. A trapdoor? He hooked the crowbar through the ring and pulled. The hidden panel lifted with a long, rusty creak. A dark opening appeared beneath the floor. Cold air drifted up from below. Titan stepped forward immediately and sniffed down into the hole. Michael knelt beside him and aimed his flashlight into the darkness. Stone steps disappeared into the earth beneath the hotel. A narrow passage. The walls were rough rock reinforced with old wooden beams. Michael's heartbeat picked up slightly. "Well," he muttered, "that's interesting." Titan barked once and started down the steps. "Hey, slow down!" Michael followed. The air grew colder the deeper they descended. The smell changed too. Less dust, more damp stone. At the bottom of the steps, the passage opened into a low tunnel. Wooden crates sat stacked against the walls, their surfaces rotting with age. Rusted metal pipes ran along the ceiling. Michael ran his flashlight across one of the crates. Faded lettering appeared beneath the dust. Whitaker Mineral Company, 1922. Michael blinked. Whitaker, he murmured. His uncle's name. Titan moved further down the tunnel, nose to the ground again. Michael followed, ducking slightly beneath a low beam. The tunnel stretched maybe 30 yards before ending at a thick metal door set into the stone wall. The door was old. Really old. A large iron wheel handle sat at the center like something from a submarine hatch. Titan sniffed around the base of it. Michael pushed the handle. It didn't move. Locked, he said quietly. Titan barked and scratched near the floor again. Michael aimed his flashlight downward. Something small sat tucked between two stones. He reached down and pulled it free. It was a notebook, leather-bound, cracked with age. Michael wiped dust from the cover. Inside the front page was a name written in neat handwriting. Harold Whitaker. Michael flipped to the last entry. The paper was yellow with age, but the ink was still readable. He read slowly. They keep asking to buy the hotel. I told them no. The mountain is the real treasure. If anyone else finds this notebook, remember, never sell the ironwood. What's under this mountain is worth more than all of Silver Ridge. Michael felt a chill run through him. What exactly did you find, Uncle Harold? Titan suddenly stiffened again. The dog turned toward the tunnel behind them. A low growl rolled through his chest. Michael snapped his flashlight toward the passage. For a moment, the beam revealed nothing but empty stone walls. Then, a faint sound. Footsteps, somewhere above them. Michael's eyes narrowed. Someone was inside the hotel. And judging by the way Titan's hackles had risen, whoever it was didn't belong there. Michael Hayes slowly turned off his flashlight. The tunnel dropped into darkness instantly. For a moment, neither of them moved. Titan stood perfectly still beside him, ears forward, body tense like a coiled spring. The dog's breathing was quiet but sharp through his nose as he listened. Michael did the same. Above them, somewhere inside the hotel, another floorboard creaked. Not the slow groan of old wood. A step, then another. Michael felt the familiar cold ripple through his chest. For years after the war, sounds like that had dragged him straight back to Afghanistan. The sudden awareness that someone might be moving just out of sight. He pushed the memory down. Focus. The steps above paused. Silence returned. Michael leaned close to Titan and whispered, "Stay." The dog didn't take his eyes off the tunnel entrance. Michael slowly switched the flashlight back on, keeping the beam low so it wouldn't shine up the stairwell. They moved quietly back through the tunnel. Every step echoed faintly against the stone. The notebook was still in Michael's jacket pocket, its presence heavy against his chest. The mountain is the real treasure. The words repeated in his mind. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, Titan stopped again. He sniffed the air. Then his growl returned. Someone was definitely upstairs. Michael placed one foot carefully on the first step. The old wood creaked. He froze. Another sound drifted down from the hallway above. A muffled voice. Then another. 2 people. Michael's jaw tightened. Great, he muttered under his breath. Titan's muscles tightened. Michael climbed the rest of the stairs slowly until his head reached the edge of the hallway floor. The corridor looked empty. But a faint beam of light moved across the far wall. Flashlight. Michael pulled himself up quietly. Titan followed silently beside him. The beam of light came from deeper inside the building, somewhere near the back rooms. Michael crouched low. The two voices became clearer now. "Told you someone's been here," one of them whispered. "So what? Just check the basement. Boss said the tunnel entrance should be here somewhere." Michael felt a sharp jolt of adrenaline. Tunnel. They knew about it. Titan's lips curled slightly, revealing his teeth. Michael placed a calming hand on the dog's neck. "Easy," he whispered. The flashlight beam swung closer down the hallway. Michael moved fast. He grabbed Titan's collar and pulled him behind the corner of a broken wall near the stairwell. Two men stepped into view moments later. Both wore dark jackets and heavy boots. One carried a flashlight. The other held something metal in his hand, maybe a crowbar. They moved slowly along the hallway. The man with the flashlight stopped near the loose floorboards Michael had pried open earlier. "Here," he said quietly. "That's it." Michael felt his heart pound. The second man knelt and lifted the plank Michael had left loose. Someone already opened it. The flashlight beam dipped down into the tunnel. "Looks like we're late. Caldwell's not going to like that." Michael's eyes narrowed. Caldwell. So it wasn't just suspicion anymore. The men stood there for a moment. "Should we go down?" the second man asked. The other man shook his head. "Not tonight. Too risky if the owner's here." He pushed the board back into place. "Let's tell Caldwell someone found it." They turned and walked back toward the front of the hotel. Their boots echoed slowly down the hall. Michael stayed frozen in the shadows until the front door creaked open, then slammed shut. Silence returned. Titan looked up at him. Michael exhaled slowly. "Well," he whispered, "that answers one question." He walked back to the trap door and stared down at the tunnel again. Caldwell already knew about it, which meant the offer to buy the hotel hadn't been about the building at all. It was about whatever lay beneath the mountain. Titan suddenly lifted his head. His ears twitched. Then he growled again. Another sound. Glass breaking. From the basement window. Michael's head snapped toward the stairwell. "They're back," he whispered. Before he could react, footsteps pounded down the stairs. A man in dark clothing burst into the hallway, clearly not expecting to see anyone there. For half a second, both men stared at each other. Then the intruder lunged. Michael barely had time to step aside as the man swung the crowbar. The metal smashed against the wall. Titan exploded forward. The German shepherd slammed into the man's chest, knocking him off balance. The intruder shouted and tried to shove the dog away. Titan clamped onto the man's sleeve, pulling hard. "Titan!" Michael shouted. The man reached into his pocket. A flash of steel appeared in his hand. Michael saw it too late. The blade swung toward the dog. Titan yelped sharply. Michael's blood ran cold. "Hey!" He grabbed a broken chair leg from the floor and swung it hard. The wood cracked against the man's shoulder. The intruder staggered backward. Titan released his sleeve. The man scrambled toward the broken basement window and climbed through it. Within seconds, he disappeared into the dark forest outside. Michael ran to the window, but saw nothing but trees swaying in the wind. The night swallowed the man completely. Michael turned quickly. Titan stood in the middle of the hallway, breathing heavily. Dark blood stained the fur along his shoulder. Michael dropped to his knees beside him. Hey, buddy." Titan's tail moved weakly. Michael carefully examined the wound. The knife had cut into the muscle but missed the bone. Still bad, but survivable. Michael felt anger burning through him. They knew about the tunnel, he said quietly. They knew about the mountain. Titan leaned against him slightly. Michael wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. Don't worry, he whispered. You're not fighting this alone. Outside, the wind howled across the mountains. And somewhere in the darkness below the cliff, someone was already planning their next move. The cold wind rolled through the pine trees surrounding Ironwood Hotel, carrying the faint scent of snow from the higher ridges of the Rockies. Inside the hallway, Michael Hayes knelt beside Titan, pressing a clean cloth against the dog's wounded shoulder. Easy, boy. Easy, he whispered. Titan's breathing slowed gradually. His amber eyes stayed locked on Michael's face, trusting him the same way he had trusted him through sandstorms, gunfire, and nights when neither of them believed they would make it home. Michael tore a strip from an old bedsheet and wrapped the wound tightly. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. You've had worse, he murmured. Titan huffed softly, as if agreeing. Michael sat back against the wall for a moment. His heart was still pounding from the fight, but something else had begun to grow in his mind. Clarity. Those men hadn't come to steal scrap metal. They had come for the tunnel, for whatever was hidden beneath the mountain. Michael looked toward the loose floorboards again. The mountain is the real treasure. His uncle's words echoed in his memory. Michael pushed himself to his feet. All right, he said quietly. Let's finish what we started. Titan stood slowly, favoring his injured shoulder but refusing to stay behind. The two of them returned to the trapdoor. Michael pried the boards aside again and opened the hidden panel. Cold air drifted upward from the tunnel below. Stay close, he told Titan. They descended the narrow staircase once more. The tunnel felt different now. Heavier, as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. Michael followed the same passage until they reached the large iron door again. Titan sniffed along the stone floor, then glanced toward Michael. Michael wiped dust from the wheel handle and placed both hands on it. Let's see what you're hiding. He turned the wheel. At first, it refused to move. Then, a grinding metallic groan echoed through the tunnel. The rusted mechanism shifted. Michael pushed harder. Slowly, the door cracked open. A rush of warm air flowed out. Michael frowned. Warm? He pushed the door wider. His flashlight beam stretched into the darkness beyond. The tunnel opened into something much larger. A cavern. Michael stepped inside. The beam of light swept across the stone walls, and he froze. Water. Clear water shimmered across the cavern floor in a wide natural pool. Steam drifted gently upward from its surface. The air inside the cavern felt warm and humid, completely different from the freezing mountain night outside. Titan walked forward cautiously. His paws touched the water. He didn't pull away. Michael knelt and dipped his hand into the pool. The water was warm. Not hot, but warmer than it should have been. A hot spring, he whispered. The cavern ceiling arched high above them, natural stone shaped by centuries of flowing water. Mineral deposits coated the rocks in pale white streaks. Michael stood slowly, staring. The pool stretched deep into the cavern, disappearing around a bend in the rock wall where more water flowed from a narrow opening in the mountain itself. A natural underground spring. Michael's mind raced. He pulled the old notebook from his jacket. Flipping through the brittle pages, he found another entry. April 14th, 1922. We confirmed it today. The water has the same mineral properties as the springs in Glenwood. Doctors say it could be worth a fortune someday if people discover it. For now, we keep it quiet. Too many people would try to take it. Michael looked up at the cavern again. His uncle hadn't just hidden a tunnel. He had hidden a natural mineral spring. Titan walked along the edge of the pool, sniffing carefully. He stopped near the rock wall where the water emerged. The dog stared at the stream pouring from the mountain. Then he sat, like a guard. Michael chuckled quietly. "Yeah," he said. "I think Uncle Harold wanted someone to protect it." The idea began forming slowly in his mind. Resorts, hot springs. People paid thousands of dollars to visit places like that in Colorado. Michael stared at the steaming water again. But before he could think further, Titan's ears snapped upright. The dog growled low. Michael turned. Footsteps echoed faintly through the tunnel behind them. Not one person this time. Several. Flashlight beams flickered along the stone walls. Voices followed. "They're down there," someone whispered. Michael's stomach dropped. Caldwell's men had returned, and this time, they weren't leaving empty-handed. The beams of their flashlights crept along the walls of the tunnel like pale fingers searching through the dark. Michael Hayes stood still beside the steaming spring, his mind moving quickly. There was no other exit from the cavern. The only way out was the tunnel they had just come through. And now Caldwell's men were standing in it. Titan's growl deepened. The German shepherd positioned himself slightly in front of Michael, one paw lifted carefully off the ground to avoid pressure on his injured shoulder. 3 silhouettes appeared at the far end of the tunnel. One of them lifted his flashlight. The beam cut across the cavern and froze when it landed on the steaming pool. For a moment, none of the men spoke. Then one of them whispered in disbelief, "Holy, this is it." Another man stepped forward, shining his light across the cavern walls. So the old man wasn't lying. Michael stepped into the light before they could move closer. "That's far enough." The men stopped. For a moment, all 3 stared at him. One of them chuckled. "Well, look at that." He lowered his flashlight slightly. "Guess Caldwell was right about the owner being stubborn." Titan barked sharply. The sound echoed through the cavern like a warning shot. The men exchanged glances. One of them stepped forward again. "Relax," he said. "We're just here to take a look." Michael didn't move. "You've seen enough," he replied calmly. The man smiled thinly. "Afraid that's not your call." Behind him, another man pulled out a phone and began recording the cavern. Michael felt anger rise slowly in his chest. "You trespassed," he said quietly. "You attacked my dog." "That wasn't personal," the man shrugged. "But business is business." Titan growled louder. The man's eyes flicked toward the dog. "Nice animal," he said. Michael's voice turned cold. "Take one more step and you'll regret it." The tension in the cavern thickened. Then the man in front sighed. "Look, we're not here to fight." He gestured toward the spring. "We just needed confirmation." "Confirmation of what?" "That Caldwell owns the future of this mountain." Michael let out a short laugh. "You might want to double-check your paperwork." The man smiled again. "Oh, We will. Then he turned and nodded toward the tunnel. Let's go. The three men backed away slowly. Within seconds, they disappeared into the darkness of the passage. Michael stood there for a long time after their footsteps faded. Titan slowly relaxed. Michael exhaled. That's not good. He looked back at the spring. Whatever Caldwell wanted, it wasn't just the hotel. And now he knew Michael had found it. Michael knelt beside the water again. Steam curled upward into the cavern ceiling. Worth a fortune someday, his uncle had written. Michael stood slowly. All right, he murmured. We're not done here. But neither was Caldwell. That night, the storm arrived. Snow swept across the mountains in heavy waves, covering the road that led up to Ironwood Hotel. Inside the old building, Michael had built a small fire in the lobby fireplace. Titan lay nearby on an old blanket, resting while Michael checked his bandage. The cut was deep, but clean. You'll be fine, Michael said softly. Titan thumped his tail once. Outside, the wind howled. Michael stared into the fire. For the first time in years, his mind felt strangely focused. War had taught him something important. When someone powerful wanted something from you, they didn't stop asking. They started taking. A loud crack echoed somewhere in the building. Michael looked up. The smell reached him seconds later. Smoke. He stood instantly. Titan! The dog was already on his feet. Smoke drifted from the hallway ceiling. Michael ran toward the corridor. At the far end of the hall, orange light flickered. Flames. The fire had started near the basement stairwell. Michael's heart slammed in his chest. Damn it! The flames spread fast, licking up the wooden walls that had been drying out for decades. The hallway filled with smoke within seconds. Michael grabbed his backpack and flashlight. Come on! Titan followed as Michael ran toward the front door. But when he reached it, the handle wouldn't move. Locked. From the outside. Michael's stomach dropped. Caldwell! The fire roared louder behind them. Smoke thickened, burning his throat. Michael tried the back exit. Same result. Locked. The realization hit him hard. They hadn't just tried to scare him. They were trying to trap him inside. Titan barked sharply. Michael dropped to one knee beside him. Okay, he coughed. Think. The ceiling cracked as flames spread along the beams. Then Titan suddenly grabbed the sleeve of Michael's jacket. The dog pulled. Hard. Titan, what are you? Titan dragged him toward the hallway floorboards. The trap door. Michael's eyes widened. Right. They ran back to the hidden entrance. The smoke was already thick in the hallway. Michael ripped the boards aside and pulled the panel open. Hot air rushed upward from the tunnel. Down, he ordered. Titan jumped first. Michael followed seconds later, slamming the hatch closed behind them. The tunnel filled with the sound of roaring flames above. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the building burned. Michael leaned against the stone wall, coughing hard. Titan stood beside him, chest heaving. Above them, the old Ironwood Hotel crackled like a giant torch in the storm. Michael looked at the dog. You saved us again, he said hoarsely. Titan nudged his hand. Far above the tunnel, the fire climbed higher into the mountain night. And for the first time since arriving in Silver Ridge, Michael Hayes understood something clearly. Caldwell wasn't just trying to buy the hotel anymore. He was trying to erase it. The realization settled in Michael Hayes's chest like a stone. Above the tunnel, the Ironwood Hotel burned through the storm. Through cracks in the ceiling, faint orange light flickered as flames consumed the old timber beams that had stood for nearly a century. Michael sat on the cold rock floor beside Titan, breathing slowly, forcing the panic down the same way he had learned to do during the worst nights after the war. In Afghanistan, fire meant chaos. Smoke meant confusion. But panic got people killed. He rested a hand gently on Titan's neck. The dog leaned into him, still breathing hard from the smoke and the climb down the stairs. "You all right, buddy?" Titan blinked slowly. His injured shoulder trembled slightly, but his tail thumped once against the stone. Michael gave a small nod. "Good." He stood and looked toward the tunnel exit. "We can't stay down here." The heat from the fire above was beginning to seep into the stone walls. If the structure collapsed, the tunnel entrance could be buried. Michael picked up his backpack. "Come on." They moved through the narrow tunnel, heading toward the far end where the passage curved deeper into the mountain. The warm mineral air grew stronger as they approached the cavern again. When they reached the underground spring, Michael stopped. Steam still drifted across the surface of the water, calm and silent, as if the chaos above the mountain didn't exist. Titan limped toward the pool and lowered his head, drinking carefully. Michael crouched beside the water and splashed some onto his face. The warmth eased the burning in his lungs. For a moment, he simply sat there, staring at the cavern walls. The mountain is the real treasure. He finally understood what his uncle had meant. But treasure didn't matter if Caldwell burned the hotel to the ground and forced him out before anyone could prove what lay beneath the mountain. Michael stood again. "We need another way out." Titan lifted his head immediately. The dog sniffed the cavern air, then walked along the far wall where the spring water flowed from the rock. Michael followed. The narrow stream disappeared through a jagged opening barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. Cold air drifted through the crack. Michael crouched and shined his flashlight inside. The beam revealed another natural tunnel carved by water over hundreds of years. It sloped downward slightly, then curved toward a faint glow of moonlight. Michael felt hope spark in his chest. "Well," he murmured, "that looks promising." He dropped to his hands and knees and crawled into the opening. Titan followed behind him. The tunnel was tight in places, forcing Michael to squeeze through the stone walls. But after 20 yards, it widened enough for him to stand. A faint rumble echoed ahead. Wind. The passage opened suddenly onto the mountainside. Michael stepped out onto a narrow ledge carved into the rock face. Snowflakes drifted through the air. Below them, the valley stretched dark and quiet beneath the storm. But above them, the Ironwood Hotel burned like a giant lantern against the night sky. Flames poured through the shattered windows. Michael stared silently. That building had stood for nearly 100 years, and Caldwell had destroyed it in a single night. Titan stood beside him, watching the fire. Michael felt a deep exhaustion settle over him. For a brief moment, he considered the simplest option: walking away. He could drive out of Silver Ridge tomorrow, forget the hotel, forget the mountain, forget Caldwell. He had done it before, after the war, after the nightmares, after the years when every loud sound sent him diving for cover. Walking away had always been easier. Titan suddenly nudged his hand. Michael looked down. The dog's eyes were steady, patient. The same look Titan had given him years ago, when Michael had nearly quit the canine training program after a particularly bad PTSD episode. Back then, the instructor had said something Michael never forgot. The dog doesn't care about your past. He only cares if you stand up tomorrow. Michael exhaled slowly. You're right, he murmured. Titan's tail moved slightly. Michael looked back at the burning hotel, then at the mountain around them. Caldwell thought the fire had ended the fight. But Caldwell didn't know about the spring, and he definitely didn't know about this exit. Michael pulled his jacket tighter against the cold. Let him think he won. Titan barked softly. Michael glanced down toward the valley road. Headlights moved slowly along the highway far below. Silver Ridge. The town that Caldwell had been quietly buying piece by piece. Michael looked back once more at the flames. You burned the building, he said quietly. But you didn't burn the mountain. Titan stood beside him as the fire crackled against the storm. And somewhere deep inside Michael Hayes, the fight that he had buried after the war finally began to wake up again. The wind along the mountainside howled like a living thing, carrying sparks from the burning Ironwood Hotel into the black Colorado sky. Michael stood on the narrow ledge for a long moment, watching the flames swallow what remained of the old building. For years he had been running from fights, from memories, from the war that followed him home. But tonight, something had changed. Caldwell had crossed a line. Titan pressed against his leg, steady and warm despite the freezing air. Michael scratched behind the dog's ear. All right, partner, he said quietly. Let's finish this. They carefully descended the rocky slope toward the back trail that wound down into the valley. Snow crunched beneath Michael's boots as they moved through the pine trees. Behind them, the hotel continued to burn. But beneath the mountain, the spring still flowed. And that was what mattered. By the time Michael reached his old pickup truck parked near the lower road, the storm had begun to clear. The fire above still glowed faintly through the trees. Titan climbed into the passenger seat slowly, careful with his injured shoulder. Michael started the engine. For a moment, he simply sat there, gripping the steering wheel. He knew what he had to do. But he needed proof. Without proof, Caldwell could bury the mountain under legal paperwork before anyone believed Michael's story. Michael glanced at Titan. You ready for a road trip? Titan thumped his tail once against the seat. 3 hours later, the truck rolled into the lights of Denver. The city felt strange after days in the mountains. Traffic lights, neon signs, people walking sidewalks without any idea that a 100-year-old secret was hidden inside a mountain a few hours away. Michael parked outside a small research laboratory attached to the Colorado Geological Institute. The place looked quiet at this hour, but one light still glowed inside. Michael grabbed a metal water bottle from his backpack. Inside it was a sample from the underground spring. He had filled it just before leaving the cavern. Titan followed him up the steps. Inside the lobby, a tired-looking man in his 60s sat behind a cluttered desk reading paperwork. He looked up as the door opened. You lost? The man asked. Michael placed the bottle on the counter. I need this tested. The man raised an eyebrow. We're not exactly open at midnight. It won't take long. The man sighed and picked up the bottle. What is it? Spring water. The man studied the liquid. People bring water samples in all the time. Michael met his eyes. This one's different. The man shrugged and carried the bottle toward the back lab. "Name's Dr. Collins," he said over his shoulder. "Give me a few minutes." Michael waited. Titan lay down beside the chair, watching the room quietly. The ticking of a wall clock filled the silence. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, Dr. Collins returned, but this time the tired expression on his face had disappeared. Now he looked stunned. "Where did you get this water?" he asked. Michael leaned forward. "In the mountains." Dr. Collins set the test report on the desk. "You understand what this is?" Michael shook his head. "Not exactly." The old scientist pushed his glasses up his nose. "This water contains lithium, magnesium, and several rare mineral compounds in concentrations we usually only see in premium therapeutic springs." Michael frowned slightly. "So?" Dr. Collins leaned closer. "If the source is large enough," he paused, "this kind of water sells for hundreds of dollars per bottle in luxury health resorts." Michael stared at him. "How large?" Dr. Collins studied the sample again. "If the spring is natural and stable, the land sitting on top of it could easily be worth," he hesitated, "hundreds of millions of dollars." The words hung in the air. Michael felt the room go quiet around him. "Hundreds of millions?" Dr. Collins nodded slowly. 300 million wouldn't surprise me." Michael leaned back in the chair. Suddenly, everything made sense. The hotel, the offers, the fire. Caldwell hadn't been buying land in Silver Ridge to build resorts. He had been hunting for this spring. Titan stood and walked over, resting his head against Michael's knee. Michael placed a hand on the dog's head. "Well," he said softly, "I guess we found the treasure." But Titan didn't wag his tail. The dog was staring toward the window. Michael followed his gaze. Across the street, a black SUV sat parked beneath a streetlight. The same kind Michael had seen outside the hotel. Inside the vehicle, someone was watching the building. Michael felt the old ranger instincts return instantly. He stood slowly. "They know," he whispered. Titan's ears lifted. The man in the SUV started the engine. Michael grabbed the test report from the desk. For the first time since arriving in Silver Ridge, he knew exactly what Caldwell was willing to burn the mountain to get. And now Caldwell knew. Michael had the proof. The engine of the black SUV idled beneath the streetlight across from the laboratory. Michael Hayes stood very still inside the glass doors of the Colorado Geological Institute, the printed report folded in his hand. Titan stood beside him, watching the vehicle with the same quiet focus he used during patrol missions years ago. Michael's instincts told him the truth immediately. This wasn't coincidence. Caldwell's people had followed him. "All right," Michael murmured under his breath. "Game's on." Titan's ears twitched. Michael turned calmly and walked back toward the desk where Dr. Collins was organizing papers. "Doctor," he said quietly. "Yes?" "I appreciate your help tonight." Dr. Collins looked confused. "Is everything all right?" Michael nodded toward the window. "Probably not." The older man leaned slightly and spotted the SUV outside. His expression changed. "Friends of yours?" Michael gave a faint smile. "Not exactly." He folded the report carefully and slid it into his jacket. "Do you mind if I use your printer?" "For what?" Michael looked back toward the streetlight again. "To start a fight." 20 minutes later, Michael walked out of the laboratory. The SUV's headlights flicked on immediately. Titan jumped into the passenger seat of the pickup truck as Michael started the engine. The black SUV pulled out behind them. Following, Michael drove through downtown Denver without looking back. Traffic lights changed slowly in the quiet early morning streets. Titan watched the side mirror. Michael spoke calmly. "They think we're running." Titan huffed softly. Michael turned onto the interstate, heading west toward the mountains. The SUV stayed 3 car lengths behind them. Michael's mind worked quickly. He could drive back to Silver Ridge, but Caldwell would be waiting. And now Caldwell knew the spring was real. Michael needed something Caldwell couldn't control: public attention. He pulled off the highway and parked beside a gas station. The SUV slowed but stayed on the road. Michael stepped out of the truck. Titan followed. Across the street stood a small media office, one of Denver's local news stations. Michael smiled slightly. Perfect. 2 hours later, cameras filled the room. Michael stood beside a large monitor while Titan sat quietly at his feet. A young reporter adjusted her microphone. "You're certain about this?" she asked. Michael nodded. "The water sample was verified tonight by the Colorado Geological Institute." The reporter glanced at the printed report. "And you claim this spring lies under an abandoned hotel near Silver Ridge?" Michael met her eyes. "Not abandoned anymore." The cameras turned on. Red recording lights blinked. The reporter faced the camera. "Breaking this morning, new claims have surfaced regarding a potential natural mineral spring worth hundreds of millions of dollars located beneath a historic hotel in the Rocky Mountains." She turned toward Michael. "Mr. Hayes, can you explain how you discovered it?" Michael spoke calmly. "My uncle owned the Ironwood Hotel for decades. He left it to me when he passed away. While exploring the property, my dog Titan discovered a hidden tunnel beneath the building." Titan lifted his head slightly as if recognizing his name. Michael continued. "That tunnel leads to a natural geothermal spring containing valuable mineral compounds. I believe someone has been trying to force me off the property in order to claim the spring." "Someone?" the reporter asked. Michael paused. Then he said the name clearly. "Richard Caldwell." The room grew quiet. Everyone in Colorado knew Caldwell, a powerful real estate developer who had quietly been buying large sections of land across the mountain region. The reporter looked surprised. "You're accusing Mr. Caldwell of attempting to steal this property?" Michael shook his head. "I'm not accusing him." He slid the lab report toward the camera. "I'm inviting the entire state to come see the mountain for themselves." By noon, the story had spread across the internet. News websites, local television, even several large YouTube channels that specialized in abandoned places and historic towns picked it up. "Veteran claims hidden mineral spring beneath burned hotel." Michael parked his truck outside the small town of Silver Ridge as reporters and bloggers began arriving from Denver. Titan watched the growing crowd of vehicles climbing the mountain road. Michael stepped out of the truck. Snow still covered the ground around the burned remains of the Ironwood Hotel. Firefighters had left hours earlier. All that remained now were blackened beams and drifting smoke. Several journalists approached cautiously. "Mr. Hayes?" Michael nodded. "Follow me." He led them across the property and lifted the loose floorboards near the old hallway entrance. Gasps spread through the group. Flashlights clicked on. Cameras rolled. The reporters followed him down the tunnel. When they reached the cavern, the steam from the underground spring drifted across the camera lenses.
One of the journalists whispered in disbelief, "My God." Another turned toward Michael. "This could revive the entire town." Michael nodded slowly.
That's the idea. Above them, the wind swept across the mountains. But far down the road, another black SUV had stopped beside the forest. Inside the vehicle, Richard Caldwell watched the news broadcast on his tablet. His jaw tightened. Michael Hayes had just done the one thing Caldwell couldn't control. He had turned the mountain into a public story. And now, the entire state of Colorado was watching. The mountain that had been forgotten for decades suddenly felt alive again. News vans lined the dirt road leading into Silver Ridge. Satellite dishes pointed toward the sky while reporters moved through the cold morning air, speaking into microphones as cameras rolled. Above them, the charred remains of Ironwood Hotel stood like a black skeleton against the white snow. Michael Hayes stood near the edge of the property, watching the crowd gather. For the first time since arriving in Silver Ridge, he wasn't alone. Titan sat beside him, bandage still wrapped around his shoulder, his amber eyes calmly scanning the growing crowd of people. Local residents had begun arriving as well. Old pickup trucks, rusty SUVs, men and women who had lived in the valley for generations. Some of them stood quietly near the reporters, staring at the burned hotel with expressions Michael couldn't quite read. An older man with a gray beard finally stepped forward. "You're the veteran they're talking about?" he asked. Michael nodded. "That's me." The man looked past him toward the cavern entrance hidden beneath the floorboards. "Is it true?" he asked. "About the spring?" Michael hesitated for a moment. Then he said simply, "Yes." The man stared at the ruins of the hotel again. "My grandfather worked here," he said quietly, "back when this town still had people." Another woman joined them, wrapping her coat tighter against the cold wind. "Silver Ridge used to be busy," she said. "Mining, logging, tourists passing through." Michael listened. "But when the mines closed," the man continued, "everyone left." The woman nodded. "And the big companies came." Michael understood immediately who she meant. "Caldwell," he said. Both of them nodded. "He bought half the land around the valley over the last 5 years," the man said. "People thought he was planning to build luxury homes." Michael glanced toward the reporters. Turns out he was looking for something else. At that moment, the rumble of engines echoed down the road. Several black SUVs climbed the mountain toward the hotel. The crowd grew quiet. Titan stood immediately. Michael's jaw tightened. The vehicles stopped near the burned entrance. Doors opened. Richard Caldwell stepped out. He wore a dark coat and expensive boots that looked completely out of place in the snow. Caldwell looked around at the crowd of reporters, cameras, and residents. For a moment, the expression on his face remained perfectly calm. But his eyes locked onto Michael. "Mr. Hayes," Caldwell said loudly. Michael stepped forward. Titan moved with him. The reporters immediately turned their cameras toward the two men. Caldwell adjusted his gloves. "I see you've made quite a spectacle out of my property." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Your property?" Caldwell gestured toward the burned structure. "That hotel was condemned years ago. I was already negotiating to purchase the land before the fire." Michael folded his arms. "Funny thing about negotiations," he said. "They usually involve the owner." Several reporters chuckled quietly. Caldwell ignored them. "What you're doing here is reckless," Caldwell continued. "You've brought media, tourists, and curious locals onto unstable ground."
Michael glanced toward the mountain. "The ground seems pretty stable to me." Caldwell's voice hardened slightly. "You're not thinking clearly. A single man cannot manage a discovery like this." Michael took a slow breath.
Then he pointed toward the town residents gathered nearby. "I'm not alone." The old man with the gray beard stepped forward. "Neither is this town." Several other residents moved closer behind him. The woman Michael had spoken with earlier crossed her arms.
"You've been buying up land around here for years," she said to Caldwell, "trying to push everyone out." Caldwell's calm expression began to crack slightly. "This isn't your concern." "It is if you plan to steal it," she replied. The reporters leaned closer. Microphones pushed forward. One journalist spoke loudly. "Mr. Caldwell, do you deny sending people to the property last night?" Caldwell said nothing. Another reporter asked, "Do you deny the fire may have been intentionally set?" Caldwell's lawyer stepped forward quickly. "No further questions," he said. But the cameras had already captured everything. Michael looked around at the crowd. Then he spoke clearly. "This mountain belongs to Silver Ridge." He pointed toward the valley below. "My plan is simple." The reporters raised their microphones. "We rebuild Ironwood as a community resort powered by the natural spring beneath it." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Michael continued. "The profits will go toward restoring the town, jobs, businesses, schools." The old man beside him smiled slowly. "That's the first good news Silver Ridge has heard in 20 years. Caldwell's face hardened. "You don't have the resources," he said coldly. Michael met his eyes. "Maybe not." He gestured toward the reporters, the residents, and the growing line of vehicles climbing the road. "But now the whole world knows what's under this mountain." Caldwell looked around at the cameras, the reporters, the townspeople who were no longer afraid to stand together. For the first time since arriving, Richard Caldwell realized something had shifted. The mountain was no longer a secret, and secrets were the only way men like him stayed powerful.
Titan stood beside Michael, watching Caldwell carefully. The dog's tail moved slowly, as if he already knew the fight was almost over. But one final chapter of the story was still waiting to be written. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the Rocky Mountains. Snow that once buried the roads around Silver Ridge melted into thin streams that ran down the hillsides. The pine forests turned deep green again, and the wind that once carried the smell of smoke now carried the quiet promise of spring. Nearly a year had passed since the fire. The ruins of Ironwood Hotel were gone. In their place stood something new. The Ironwood Springs Resort rose from the mountainside like it had always belonged there. Wide wooden balconies overlooked the valley. Large windows reflected the surrounding peaks, and warm steam drifted gently from the outdoor mineral pools carved into the rock near the spring. Where there had once been silence, there was now life. Visitors walked along the wooden boardwalk that connected the resort to the Old Town Road. Families stood near the overlook taking pictures of the mountains. Children laughed as they ran across the open courtyard. Silver Ridge was alive again. Michael Hayes stood on the upper balcony of the resort, resting his hands on the wooden railing. The air smelled clean. Fresh mountain wind mixed with the faint mineral scent drifting from the spring below. Behind him, the sound of dishes clinking inside the dining hall echoed softly as staff prepared for the evening guests. Many of them were locals, people who had nearly left the town years ago. Now they had work again, purpose again. Michael took a slow breath and looked across the valley. For a long time, he had believed the war had taken everything from him. Peace, family, a future. But somehow, the mountain had given him something back. Not the life he once imagined, but a different one. And maybe that was enough. A soft movement beside him broke the silence. Titan stepped out onto the balcony. The German shepherd moved a little slower now than he once had. The scar on his shoulder was still visible beneath his thick fur, a reminder of the night the hotel burned. But his eyes were still sharp, still loyal. Michael crouched beside him and scratched behind his ears. "You remember the first night we came here?" he asked quietly. Titan looked out over the valley, at the small town below, at the road where cars now arrived every day bringing visitors. The dog's tail moved slowly. Michael smiled. "Yeah," he said softly. "Me too." A voice behind them called out. "Mr. Hayes?" Michael stood and turned. A young employee from the front desk stepped onto the balcony. "The evening guests have arrived," she said. Michael nodded. "Thanks." She hesitated for a moment before adding, "The mayor from Silver Ridge is here too. He wants to thank you again for everything." Michael chuckled quietly. "Tell him he can thank Titan." The employee smiled and walked back inside. Michael looked down at the dog. "You hear that?" he said. "You're famous now." Titan wagged his tail once. Below them, guests were gathering near the natural spring pool carved into the mountain rock. Steam rose slowly into the golden light of sunset. Michael watched them for a moment. People had come from all over the state to see the spring. But most of them didn't know the whole story. They didn't know about the night the hotel burned. They didn't know about the tunnel beneath the floorboards, or the dog who refused to stop digging. Michael rested his hand gently on Titan's head. "Funny thing about life," he murmured. "You think the worst day you've ever had is the end of everything." Titan looked up at him. Michael smiled faintly. "But sometimes..." He looked out across the mountains glowing in the evening sun. "It's just the beginning of the story you were meant to live." Titan leaned against his leg. The two of them stood there quietly for a while, watching the valley as the sun dipped behind the distant peaks. The war was over. The mountain was safe. And the dog who had walked beside him through every battle was still there, still watching, still guarding, still refusing to leave. Michael scratched Titan's neck one more time. Then he said softly, the same words he had spoken many times before. "We survived the war, partner." The dog's ears lifted. Michael looked across the peaceful valley below. "And we survived this mountain too." Titan lifted his head slightly, as if he understood every word. For a moment, the two of them simply stood there in the quiet mountain air, watching the sun disappear behind the distant peaks. Some battles change a man forever. But sometimes, the loyalty of one good dog can help a man find his way back. If this story touched your heart, I'd like to ask you something simple. Leave a comment below. You can write where you're watching from, or just type one if you believe a loyal dog can change a life. And if stories like this mean something to you, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Because the next story about courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a veteran and his dog might be even more powerful than this one. And who knows? Maybe we'll see you again in the next story.